So, how did this book project come about? I didn't plan to do this book. What happened is, it must have been 93 or 94. I went to see His Holiness, and I requested him to please write a very brief root text that could be used by Geshis when they taught Westerners. Because my experience has been that the Lamrim, it's such a fantastic, clear text, but it already assumes that you understand rebirth, and you know what the Buddha Dharma Sangha are, and it has all, it assumes some kind of background that most, people who grew up in Western countries don't have. And so I thought, oh, it'd be wonderful if His Holiness just writes a brief text, and then, the Geshis could use it as what they're going to comment on. So I requested him, and then His Holiness said, well, before we do the root text, the small version, we should write the whole big version first, and then distill it. And so then he had the private office give me a transcript of one of his teachings. I think it was on the sacred words of Manjushri, and to use as the foundation. So I did that. I wasn't expecting to write something larger, but I did that. And then I went back to see him, and then more material got added, because I had many questions to clarify, so I would ask him questions and then incorporate that material. And then every time I went to teachings he gave, I would hear more, and I would say, oh, that has to go in the book too. So the book started getting bigger. And then one time when I went back, I can't remember what year it was in, sometime in the 2000s, His Holiness said, this book has to be different. It has to be unique. So we should put in information about other Buddhist traditions. So Chinese Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, let's get information in about other Buddhist traditions, because now we need to be 21st century Buddhists, which means having a bigger, broader view. And he also was saying that he has so much dialogue with people from other religions, Jews and Protestants and Catholics and Muslims and Hindus, but he said he doesn't have very much contact, comparatively, with people from other Buddhist traditions. And he said, really as Buddhists, we should come together and understand each other's traditions, because we all are teachers of, we are all students of one teacher, the Buddha. So he, at that point really changed kind of the direction of the book, and said, it should be about various Buddhist traditions, not in a simple way like, well, yes, we all do bowing, and, people in Southeast Asia bow this way, and in China they bow this way, in Tibet they bow this way. Not that kind of thing, but really on the level of the teachings, so that we can see how the teachings are similar, but also how they're different. Yeah, and so I would go back every few years, and report to His Holiness and read the, tell him how the book was progressing at all. And meanwhile, the book was getting bigger, 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 because at that time it wasn't totally clear to me that His Holiness wanted just like one book about all the Buddhist traditions. So the book was quite large, over 2,000 pages, and in computer files. I mean, several volumes if it were published. And then the last time I went, Samdang Rinpoche was really very helpful in helping me ask questions to His Holiness after I had left after the interviews. And at that time it was really clarified. His Holiness wants one book really to bring the Buddhist traditions together. So then I took the long manuscript and I drew out what I considered the most important topics to show, you know, how they are in the Pali tradition, how they are in the Sanskrit tradition. Yeah, and then my hope is now that this shorter book is published, then to go back to the longer one, do some editing, and get that out in print. Yeah. So that's how the book came about. It's been a tremendous learning experience for me in many, many areas. First of all, just working with His Holiness and, you know, getting to know him better, watching how he does things. He has an incredibly brilliant mind. It's amazing. I really wish I could understand Tibetan fluently, because I would go in there very often, and he you know, when I went in there, he would have asked other geshis to come with, you know, for the kind of dialogue. So there was usually a few of us, you know, maybe 6 people or something like that. And I would ask a question, trying to get a point clear to put it in the book. And then His Holiness, he would look at the question this way, and he would look at it this way, and the other geshis would, you know, turn in their viewpoints, and they would discuss it, and then this way and that way, and the other perspective, and then at the end, you know, I mean, I could see it was this whole incredible creative process using reasoning, as His Holiness always emphasizes. And then at the end, I would say, okay, can we synthesize a conclusion for that I can put in the book? And His Holiness would throw up his hands and would say, ah ha ha ha, no conclusion, you know, and it was great, you know, because you could see that the whole process of just analyzing brought a lot of depth and understanding to the topic, you know, and really made people investigate much more deeper, much, you know, more profoundly. But at the end, conceptualization can only go far. You can't completely get everything 100% down, you know, using words. And that's when he would burst into laughter and say, oh, no conclusion, you know? And it was just beautiful to see that, the kind of brilliance of his mind. And then the ability to, you know, see the limitations of whatever thing, you know, he is doing, yeah? Yeah, it was really quite extraordinary, and his power to look at things from so many different viewpoints. So that was one thing I really benefited from. Another thing was I had to learn about all these other traditions. And of course, there's so much to learn, so I didn't learn everything there is to be learned. I focused principally on Chinese Buddhism and on Theravada Buddhism. But His Holiness, he was really moving on beyond the words Theravada, Mahayana, Chinese, Tibetan, you know, and so he really wanted it to be the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. So even though Buddha didn't speak either Pali or Sanskrit, you know, that these were languages that the sutras were eventually written down in, you know, he wanted to express it that way. And that really clarifies that the Pali tradition, it's not just another way to say Theravada. And Sanskrit tradition is not just another way to say Mahayana. Because if you look at the Pali tradition, yeah, okay, there's a lot of discussion about the path to arhatship, but there's also a bodhisattva path laid out. And when you look at the Sanskrit tradition, yes, there's a lot of talk of the Bodhisattva path to full awakening, but the path to arhatship is also laid out. Yeah. So looking at the traditions in this way really broadened my perspective. You know, and I really see the necessity of getting over some of these, the way we use words, you know, to define different groups. And especially in the West, people often, when they talk about Buddhism in the West, this is Westerners, they say there's three traditions: Vipassana, Mahayana, and Tibetan. And that's completely, you know, inaccurate. First of all, Vipassana is a meditation technique that is found in every Buddhist tradition. So, you know, in Chan Buddhism, you have Vipassana. In Tibetan Buddhism, you have Vipassana. You know, it's a meditation technique that the Buddha taught that everybody practices. It's not a Buddhist tradition, okay? Then, you know, talking about Mahayana, people usually just put in Zen in the West because that's what they're familiar with. But actually it includes Pure Land Buddhism, it includes Tentai, it includes Huayan, you know, many other forms of Buddhism. And it includes Vajrayana, okay? So, calling Vajrayana, sometimes when people say Tibetan tradition, they instead say Vajrayana. So, you know, Vipassana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Doesn't make any sense because Vajrayana is a type of Mahayana Buddhism. And Vajrayana does not equal Tibetan Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism does not equal Vajrayana. Why? Because Vajrayana is also practiced in Japan. There was initially a small Vajrayana school in China as well, and there's some people who practice it. Yeah, and Tibetan Buddhism isn't just Vajrayana. It also includes, you know, the general teachings on the Four Noble Truths. Everything that is taught in the Pali tradition is, you know, put it this way, Vajrayana assumes you have a basis of, you know, the path to arhatship, the hearer's path, that you have a basis of the Sutrayana explanation of the Bodhisattva path. And then on top of that, you practice Vajrayana. Okay? So it's not like these traditions are all separate. Similarly, Mahayana, what is often called Mahayana, is actually built on the foundation of the Pali tradition. Yeah? You learn all those teachings. You practice all of them. The only thing that you do differently if you're going to follow the Bodhisattva path is, in addition to generating your own wish for liberation, you also generate the bodhicitta that wishes to lead everybody to liberation. And that motivation becomes stronger than your wish for your own liberation. Okay? But yeah, we need in the West, I think, to get more accurate about these kinds of things. So the book has all sorts of different topics in it. It starts out with a little bit of history and cultural perspective, but then goes right into talking about refuge and how are the Buddha Dharma Sangha seen in these different traditions. Then we talk about the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. His Holiness was very particular that he wanted that in the book. Then we went into the higher training in ethical conduct, higher training in concentration, higher training in wisdom. Then there's a chapter, you know, really about the meaning of emptiness and selflessness, and another chapter on dependent arising and the perspective on dependent arising from the different Buddhist traditions. Then we move into the four immeasurables. You know, because some people in the Tibetan community, for example, don't even know that people in Southeast Asia meditate on the four immeasurables. You know, because all the traditions have all these old, inaccurate misconceptions about each other. You know, so it explains the Pali, how it teaches the four immeasurables, the Tibetan, how it teaches, you really see, you know, how close they are. Then it gets into bodhicitta and how that's presented in both traditions, and then the bodhisattva path, because what many people don't know is that the Indian master Dhammapala, who lived 6th century AD, he wrote a text called the Treatise on the Paramis. You know, the Paramis, Paramitas, you know, explains how you do the bodhisattva path, you know, according to the Pali tradition. And it's fascinating because there's a layout of the 10 paramis. In Sanskrit tradition, there's the 10 paramitas. Many of these overlap, but many are different. But even in the ones that are different, that have different names, the meaning is found in the other tradition as well. Okay, so yeah, fascinating. And I found also that working on this book was so good for my own practice, because I would read like the Pali suttas, and they really helped my meditation on renunciation, you know, tremendously. And I would read some from the Chinese way of how they practice generating bodhicitta. And then that would also help my practice when I meditated on it. So, yeah, so I'm very excited about this book, and I'm really hoping that people will read it and benefit as much as I did from writing it. And His Holiness is also very clear that he wants it translated into many, 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 many languages, you know, and published in Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, you know, all over the countries, you know, where the Pali tradition is very important. Thailand, you know, especially India, and so that it can be translated in very good translations, and then, you know, other Buddhists can read it, and then on the basis of that, we can have coming together in a more really mutually productive and respectful way, you know, so that Buddhists from all the traditions that we can see that we have one teacher and many traditions.